travel journalist and a writer and a broadcaster. And about every 2 weeks, we have someone interesting on at the same time, same station, same place. And you are going to love today's guest. He's an author. He's a journalist. His name is Dave Seminara, and he has written a book called Mad Travelers. And I want to get the subtitle right because sometimes it's a long one. It's a tale of wanderlust, greed, and the quest to reach the ends of the earth. Obviously, this our every other week talk is about travel because I'm a travel journalist. And Dave has written a new book about mad travelers, and I want you to meet him right now. Can we bring him on into the show? I know this is a strange background for me. I'm in the region of Bordeaux in France. Hi, Dave. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rudy, and thanks for the great introduction and for sticking the landing on that long subtitle. Appreciate it.
Well, I read it off. I had to get it on my phone because I whenever I write your name anywhere, whenever I write the title, I always have to, let's see. Right. The conman. Right. Anyway, let's first tell me a little about, let's talk a little about your background. You used to be in the Foreign Service and you had some very interesting posts, didn't you?
I did. I am a mad traveler. I was in the Foreign Service. I joined the Foreign Service when I was about 29 or 30 because I thought, since I'm a compulsive traveler, why don't I try to make something constructive of my travel addiction and go into the Foreign Service? At least I'll have a chance to indulge my wanderlust and get paid a little bit. I served in Macedonia, Trinidad, Hungary, and also in the Bureau of Central African Affairs. I was the desk officer for Chad in the Central African Republic. That's quite
an assemblage of very different countries, each one of them.
Yes, yeah, and actually also, as people who pick up my first book will learn too, I also created a diplomatic incident with Malta when I was 12 years old too. That's a whole nother story. But so my career of creating diplomatic incidents goes back to 1986.
And now you are.
Now I'm a writer, which is a lot easier, a lot simpler title.
And where are we reaching you today?
Oh, I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida. Sorry, we just had a hurricane scare here about 24 hours ago or so. Luckily, it was downgraded to a tropical storm, so my backyard is a little bit of a mess. So I'm indoors today, but we were spared the Category 1 hurricane that was supposed to be hitting us.
Well, good, because we needed you here today. If you're watching this later, we're doing this live, and you may be watching this on Facebook right now or YouTube. But if you're watching it later, because it's going to be on YouTube long after Dave and I are gone, I guess forever. We're talking on the 8th of July of 2021. So we're sort of, travel is beginning to come back after COVID. Just keep that in mind as we speak, and I'll repeat it about halfway through. That this is the 8th of July of 2021. It is a little after 9 o'clock in the evening where I am in France, and it is you're in Florida, so it's 3 in the afternoon for Dave. Okay, Dave, what
coffee time?
Give us right. Give us an example what a mad traveler is. When you say mad traveler, I mean mad traveler does not mean people who are really irritated because they have to wear masks on planes. It's much more interesting than that.
Yeah, well, the original mandate of this book was to write a book about wanderlust. So I would say, who is a mad traveler? A mad traveler is someone who is severely afflicted with wanderlust. And there's a lot of those profiled in the book. I'm one of them, but I'm obviously not the focus of the book. You want me to tell you about a few of the maddest, craziest travelers that I wrote about?
Please do.
Yeah, I got to know a lot of the world's greatest or most traveled people through a series I started for BBC Travel in 2015 called Travel Pioneers. So this put me in touch with some guys who were at the top of the rankings list on, for example, websites like Most Traveled People and The Best Traveled, Nomad Mania. A lot of people might not realize this, but travel can be competitive for some people. And there are rankings based upon the number of countries, provinces, territories, and so on that you have visited. So a number of these guys are ranked number 1 or 2 or in the top 10, and others are people who are quite anonymous. Like, for example, one of the guys who's one of the top rated travelers in the world, who I think is fascinating, his name is Jorge Sanchez. Jorge is most interesting to me because a lot of the world's most traveled people are pretty affluent, and if you have a lot of money, you can make it around the world. Jorge, on the other hand, has worked his way around the world. He tells me that he's never really had a proper job. He's in his early 60s, Jorge, and he has visited not only every country in the world, but every region of every major country, and on an unbelievable number of islands on the map. If you try to put up pins to all the places Jorge's been, the pins would be everywhere, would overwhelm the map. and he's never really had a proper job. So he works his way around the world being a dishwasher, mechanic, driver, tour guide, whatever sort of bartender, whatever sort of jobs that he can pick up. And he travels on the cheap. So I really respect Jorge for that. You want a few more? Or how would you like to go?
Yeah, give me another one.
Sure.
Well, I know where I want to go next.
Let's get the maddest traveler of all is William Bakelin. You want to talk about him?
Well, no, that's the con man. That's the con man.
Save him for later? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to get right into that.
He's also a mad traveler.
He is a mad traveler, but I want our viewers to sort of hear about one other person, and when you say traveler, we all like to travel, or not all of us do, but these guys really travel. Give us another example.
Oh yeah, another guy that I like quite a lot is an Irish traveler. His name is David Langan. And the thing that I find fascinating about Langan is he's a stamp collector. So different people travel the world and become compulsive travelers for different reasons. I've met people who are birders, and the reason why they try to travel to obscure places is because they're looking for some specific warbler, some strange warbler that only exists at 8,000 feet elevation in Ecuador or whatever. Other people have different reasons that they go to the world. David Langan is a stamp collector. So what he likes to do is he aspires to travel. He travels to every country of the world, and not just every country, but any entity that will issue a stamp. So, for example, there's an island in the South Pacific called the colloquial nickname of it is Tin Can Island, and Tin Can Island issues stamps. So David Langan goes to every place that issues stamps, and then he sends a postcard from that place back to Ireland, to his home, to see if it'll make it. Now, he's so dedicated to all of this that obviously some war-torn countries and other places with really bad postal services, he still goes there and tries to figure out ingenious ways to get that postcard back there to himself.
Well, I think you hit on one of the things that these travelers are so intent on collecting countries that they want to go to war-torn. They want to go to North Korea. They want to go to South Sudan. They want to go to war-torn countries. Now, there are 3 organizations that keep a record of people's travels, and then I guess each year, at least in one of them, ranks where they are compared to the other people. Here's the most traveled guy this year, but if he doesn't get to that weird island called Tin Can Island, whatever it is, and maybe might go up maybe might slip down and somebody will go up over him. And that's sort of like a stab to the heart, isn't it, to these guys? I mean, as you say, they're very competitive. They're out there trying to get to these places that are very difficult to get to, sometimes very dangerous to get to, so they can collect not more stamps on their passport, but more places. Tell us about these 3 groups briefly.
Yeah, some of them are more competitive than others. I would say a few of these guys are very cutthroat, and others are pretty cool about it. But all of them have to cooperate with each other too, and that's kind of an interesting thing about it. Is in a way though, because when they're trying to get to places, these very, very remote islands, you can't usually afford to get there yourself, because if you're chartering a boat to some crazy island in the South Pacific, you need to pool your resources with others. So although they're competitors in ways, they have to work together. In any event, the 3 main clubs that you're talking about are, the most famous one is the Traveler Century Club. Now that was founded in the 1950s by a guy named Bert Hemphill, who was a travel agent, who sort of wanted to prove, I think, that he was the world's most traveled person. And I think you'll find a commonality in all 3 of these groups. They're all founded by super travelers who sort of have their own claim to being the world's most traveled person. So in the 1950s, a guy named Bert Hemphill, who was a travel agent in LA, he thought he was the world's most traveled person, and he founded this club which is still alive today, which is a wonderful club called the Traveler Century Club, which is the biggest one. And they do not rank travelers, although they do give awards. They rank them in a way. What they do is they have different levels. So if you've reached X number of territories, you're a diamond member. If you've X number, you're a gold, and so on and so forth. So they sort of rank them. The other 2 absolutely rank them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Most Traveled People was founded by Charles Veely, who is another guy who is one of the world's most traveled people. I think he was frustrated with the Traveler Century Club because he thought their list wasn't extensive enough. So the Traveler Century Club divides the world into about 320 some odd places. Charles thought that wasn't nearly enough because the world is too big. So Charles founded his club, which has almost about, I think, 900 places. It divvies the world up into like 900 places these days. And for one person, Harry Mitsidis, a British Greek man, who founded the 3rd club, Nomad, which is now called Nomad Mania. It used to be called The Best Traveled. he divides the world up even to more places. I forget off the top of my head how many he's got, but it's well over 1,000. I want to say he's at 1,500 places, something like that. And Harry is number one on his in his club. He's number one ranked. Charles is number one in his club.
Oh, amazing.
But they haven't always been. And the interesting thing is others have usurped them. They've come back and the rankings they change. Got one guy manages to figure out how to go somewhere. For example, there was the rankings changed. For example, one of these wonderful guys profiled in the book, Bob Boniface, who's a very interesting gentleman from Chicago. He figured out a way to get to the Gaza Strip a few years back. What he did was he found an eye clinic in the Gaza Strip. They could arrange a permit for them if they donated something like $10,000 to this clinic or whatever. And he thought, well, it's a good cause. He's a relatively affluent guy. He's the CEO of an alarm company in Chicago. Said, I'll donate $10,000 to an eye clinic in Gaza. And he was able to get into the Gaza Strip, giving him an advantage on his rival, Don Parrish, who's one of the best travelers in my book. And he usurped for a period of time. He jumped over Don Parrish to the number one ranking based upon this visit to the Gaza Strip.
This is so it's such a weird competition, but it fed into the character around whom you build your book to a large extent. And we're going to talk about not just mad travelers, but folks who don't like to travel and why. Is it because of your environment? Is it because of your genealogy? We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's get to the character that you build your stories around in your book, because all the folks you have mentioned play into this, and the competitive nature of getting to more countries or more places than the next guy fed into this guy, this young man, con man, fed right into his plan, which was to appeal to people who want to go in difficult places and tell them, I can get you there. Tell us about him.
Yeah, so the gentleman we're talking about is, let's call him William Bakeland, although he has various aliases. I mostly used the name William Bakeland in my book. So for simplicity's sake, let's go with that one, although he's used various different aliases over the years, and different people knew him as different names. So anyways, let's call him William Bakeland. William Bakeland, as I understood it circa 2015, when I started researching this book, was an aristocratic billionaire. He was an heir to a tremendous plastics fortune. And although he was in his early 20s and had all this money at his disposal, rather than going to places like Santorini or Ibiza, no, he was interested in getting to geographic oddities, the same kinds of places that these guys were trying to get to. Now, if you are one of these super elite travelers and you want to go to a place like, for example, Bouvet Island, which is the world's most remote island, it's in the South Atlantic Ocean, and you want to get there, you cannot go to Expedia, you cannot go to TripAdvisor, Travelocity, you cannot call your travel agent and book a trip there. You need some ingenious way to get to these places. William was a person who was finding those ingenious ways, and he was organizing trips and getting these guys to places they thought they would never be able to get to before. So for a period of time, he was a hero in the world of extreme travel, and everyone thought he was only doing this out of his own passion, out of his own interest in these places, because he was a billionaire. He didn't need to make money.
And he was very young. This was 7 years ago. He was in his early 20s. He was very young, but I gather he was very, very poised and certainly had the demeanor of a very young billionaire. So people found it easy to believe this guy has really gone to a lot of, really knows what's going on here and has the assets to do whatever he wants.
Correct. And he also had a very... He had a very upper crust British accent too, which was another part of first of all, he had a very posh upper crust. It was described to me as a BBC accent. He had a very posh, sort of aristocratic BBC accent, which impressed people, especially people who aren't Brits and aren't used to hearing such a high class, highbrow accent like that. And secondly, and I think this is the most important part, was his encyclopedic knowledge of geography. Now, if you can impress guys like this who have been to every place on the planet, if you can impress guys like that with your knowledge of geography, you are a wizard. And this guy, William, has been studying geography as a passion since he was a little boy, literally. So he would be able to name drop some remote island in Micronesia, and people would be like, what the hell is he talking about? They'd look it up later on and be like, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. So he played the part of this incredible billionaire and a guy who knew his geography.
You mentioned Bouvet Island, and I gather that it's very difficult to step on that island because the seas are so rough around it, and that many of these folks who want to collect everything, including Bubé Island, have gone there and not been able to call it one of their, not be able to conquer it, not be able to put it onto their list, including with our young conman friend. He took them there, but unfortunately, the captain and the crew said, we are not going near those rocks. You're not going to be able to step on the island. You can't even reach out and touch it. So Bubé Island became this sort of this quest, this impossible dream for these guys. And I gather he, Mr. Bakeland, would play one off the other, call one and say, you know, for $50,000, I think I can get you here. I'll take you there, you know, and basically
he understood the interest of the. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
He understood. He understood his targets very well. Like any good con artist, he studied these people very well. He knew what their interests were. He could see on the different lists which places they were missing. Right. So, for example, if he's going to approach one guy, you can go onto these websites and click on that guy's name and see, okay, which places has he been to? The list is very, very long. And which places does he need to get to? A small list of these things, right? So he'd look at those places and be like, aha, so-and-so hasn't been to wherever. He's a good target. Let's lump him in with whomever. And he knew the interests of the different guys too. And most importantly, he knew how much money each guy had too. So he was going after the big fish because, as I said, not all of these extreme top travelers are very wealthy. So Jorge Sanchez, the dishwasher,
Jorge had no money to play in this game. He couldn't play in this game.
So he wasn't hitting Jorge up, right? Also, Don Parrish, a gentleman in Chicago, who's also one of the world's most top travelers. He was including Don in some aspects, but I found out he was charging Don a lot less money than he was charging some of the other guys. So he studied his targets carefully.
For the same thing.
For the same. Yes.
Same trip. Okay. So for a while he was successful, wasn't he? And people and these guys loved him. Mainly guys, because there are some women, but they're men.
All of William's victims are men, every single one of them. Okay. And so yes, we can call them men. And I will say that there are some female extreme travelers, and there are definitely some women who have traveled to every country on earth. However, when you look at the top of the rankings of all these clubs, for whatever reason, men are more obsessive about this type of extreme travel. And all of William's victims definitely were men.
All right, let's come back
to. And he was successful. Sorry, you're right. He was very successful. And he was literally, one guy had a memorable quote. He said that for us, William was literally expanding the map by bringing us to places that we previously thought we would never make it to.
All right, let's put him aside for a moment and talk about why people do this. And then the flip side of that is, why are some people, and I have a couple particular friends of mine who I travel quite a bit, not nowhere in this league, obviously, but I've traveled quite a bit compared to most people. And these friends, why do you want to? And I say, why don't you just come try Europe, or hey, you're really, why? We got everything here. I'm fine. I'm perfectly happy. So let's talk about why some people travel so assiduously and some have no interest in it.
There's a lot of I get into a lot of this in the book, as you know. There's a number of different components of this. And so I devote different chapters to each one of them. But so, for example, curiosity is a big one we should touch on. And the ways people satisfy their curiosity, because all of us are curious about things to some extent or another. But some people can satisfy that curiosity with Google, or with reading a book, or with going onto YouTube and just watching a video about something. Others of us are curious enough that we have to go there and see it with our own eyes. So curiosity is an important factor, and the way curiosity manifests itself in different people is an important factor, number one. Number two, I think, is the genetic component of this. And so I get into this in great detail in my book as well, too, is that there is something called the so-called nomadic gene, which, for those of you who have subscribed to National Geographic, you might remember back in 2013, this caught my eye and it had me wondering about it, was this cover story they did about the so-called nomadic gene. As soon as I read that, I thought, I'm getting this test. I'm finding a doctor.
This is a real gene. I'm not talking about speaking lightly.
It is a real gene, and I knew I had to be tested for it because I wanted to know to what degree my wanderlust was attributable to my genetics. So I think that the genetic component of it is also interesting. There's also obviously a tremendous environmental factor as well too, that some people are exposed to travel at a young age, or at whatever age, and they get hooked on it, and others do not, based upon the experience that they have. So if your initial early experiences are very positive, you want more of that. If your initial experiences are negative, you want less of it, and so on. Like, so for example, you mentioned that I profiled travel haters in my book, and I did that as well. I did have to devote one chapter to people who absolutely detest travel, and I don't understand people like that at all. So I thought, these are foreign species to me. I want to understand this strange ecosystem they live in. So I interviewed a number of these people, and one of them, for example, told me that her parents were essentially travel addicts, and she grew up being dragged around the world to all kinds of exotic destinations, and she hated it and became very resentful. So for her, I think her hatred of travel is deeply rooted in her childhood and her early experiences of disliking it. So travel is a really complex experience. There's a number of different motivations. I think the final one, I mean, there's a number of them too that I get into in the book, but the other one too, I think also is escape. A lot of us are escape artists, and travel is an escape for us. And I'll put myself in that category. Many of us simply need that change of scenery, either because we're hyperactive. A lot of us, we might have attention deficit disorder, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, where some people are creatures of habit. They're happy to be at home. They're happy to be in comfortable, safe surroundings. But others of us are the opposite. We feel most alive when we are in unfamiliar surroundings. So if we're in the same routine every day, we need an escape from that, because that is, I think, part of our nature.
You talked about some well-traveled writers. I'm looking at page 188 of your book. Some peripatetic writers who have struggled with depression because our friend Paul Theroux in his book, The Tao of Travel, which I read years ago, you did, talked about how Jack Kerouac, the author of On the Road, inspired millions of young people to travel, but he spent much of his adult life on the road depressed. And then you list all these people who struggle with depression. Let me... Hans Christian Andersen, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Mark Twain, James Joyce, Ernest Hemingway, Hunter Thompson, Bruce Chatwin, a famous travel writer, V.S. Naipaul, Arthur Rimbaud, Samuel Beckett, Dostoevsky, Joseph Conrad, William Faulkner, Agatha Christie, Johnny Cash, Captain James Cook, Sir Edmund Hillary. These are all world famous authors, explorers, whatever. And that didn't quite scratch their itch, fundamentally, apparently.
Yeah, all of those were mad travelers, and a lot of them had problems with depression and other mental issues. You mentioned Hemingway. I mean, look at Hemingway. He never stayed put for longer than 2 weeks, nor did Bruce Chatwin. I think that when you're facing a lot of problems at home, and problems could be a number of different things. They could be health problems. I've had a lot of health problems, for example. And when you have health problems, for example, you feel like a change of scenery is going to cure you. You suffer from that illusion that maybe not cure you, but you'll feel better if you could just get a change of scenery, right? You go someplace where the weather's warmer. You go someplace with a different climate. Someone famous, I forget who it was, said a change in the weather can make. Oh gosh, I'm going to misquote it, so I won't even try. But you get the point here. And that's just health, but there are a lot of different problems people face. People face divorces. People have marriages break apart and they go off on tremendous trips. Some of the best travel books, I think in that same chapter, I talked about some of the greatest travel books that ever been written have been people suffering from some form of grief. Either they had a loved one die, or they overcame some sort of an illness, or someone else did. So travel is something that people do to escape problems. I'm not saying everyone does that, but certainly a lot of us do.
Well, I was just going to say, for some people, travel is indeed a balm, and is indeed curative to some extent, and making you sharp mentally, or lifting your spirits. I mean, there have been studies of people who speak a second language or more creative, can make decisions faster. Travel often helps you speak a different language. So not all mad travelers are depressives.
No.
Some people actually do find succor and comfort in traveling, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. People, you cannot generalize about mad travelers, but what I tried to do in the book is profile a lot of different common motivations and such, and profile patterns of sort of behavior. But no, I don't want to leave the impression that everybody who travels is a miserable wretch who's suffering from depression or some sort of health problems or such.
No, but that was the list I read is a pretty impressive list of famous.
No, it is, and it's not complete. It's not complete. It's just those are just ones that I am aware of that I've read about, through my reading and such and research.
Okay, let's go back to our con man. So
yeah.
He's in his early 20s. He's got a lot of rich people, and he's obviously charging them a lot of money, overcharging them. But he seems to have connections in many cases to be able to get people into war-torn areas or places where travel is restricted. Somehow he always seems to know somebody. He often attributes it to his wealthy background. His family has given a lot of money to this country. And how did things start going badly for him?
When he started canceling trips. It's a very simple answer to that question. So what happened was he started canceling a number of trips on people, right? However, as you pointed out before, a lot of these guys are sort of competitive, and he was making different deals with people and different trips, so they weren't comparing notes with each other. So there was quite a period of time when he was canceling trips on a number of different guys, but they weren't talking to each other, comparing notes about it. Mm-hmm. Until sort of all hell broke loose at this extreme travel conference by a guy named Kolya Spori. So actually, when you talked about mad travelers, I should have given Kolya Spori as one of my examples. Kolya is a fascinating guy. He's got a wonderful blog. Also, it's called, I believe it is called Luxury Rogue, Kolya Spori. If you Google that, you'll find his mad blog. But Kolya likes he is a consummate extreme traveler. He holds a conference every year called ETIC, Extreme Travel Congress. Always in some place dangerous or difficult. Mogadishu one year, not just Mogadishu also, but the conference was held in a hotel in Mogadishu that had just been bombed and literally turned to rubble 2 years before. That's where he held the conference. Another year it was in Chechnya, places like this, FARC-controlled Colombia, places of this nature. And so William went to his conference in Mogadishu. And the following year, the conference was supposed to be held in what they call a micronation, what I would call a made-up nation called Liberland, which is a small little island in the Danube, which was claimed by this eccentric guy, this eccentric businessman who wanted to start his own country and just plucked this island in the middle of the Danube and said, "This is my own country," and started issuing passports. So Kolya loved this and said, "We're going to have our conference in Liberland." And William was supposed to be there along with his mother, who he said was called Lady Violet Bakelin. And of course, she had that title because she's an aristocrat like him. And the two of them were set to, now it's right next to Serbia, and Serbia was their final country to visit. And they were supposedly going to become the first mother and son team to have visited every country in the world. And they were supposed to be delivering the keynote speech at this big conference until they didn't show up. And then everyone started talking like, where is the guest of honor? And, well, he canceled a trip on you recently to Sudan. That's interesting because he just stood me up in the Central African Republic and in the Avis Island off of Venezuela and in the Trinidad and Martin Vaz Islands off of Brazil and in Chechnya and wherever, right? So they all started talking and comparing notes. And then a couple of guys started investigating him, and his story came completely unraveled. And you'll read more about that in the book. But let's just say that almost everything that people thought they knew about him,
because the internet connection's a little weak, and you're studying. I'm going to go closer into my daughter's home here and see if it gets stronger inside. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay. I'm inside. I think it may be a little stronger here. Yeah. So people started comparing. People said, "Oh, wait a minute. I was supposed to go on a trip with him. And and he canceled. He canceled on you too. And by the way, did you get your money back?"
No, and no one had. And so he started to be investigated by a couple of these guys. Harry Mitsidis from Nomad Mania started to really unravel his story, along with some help. He had some tips from another traveler a couple of years before, an accountant from England, who was suspicious of him. The very first person who was suspicious of him was suspicious of him years ago, and had tried to tip people off, but no one really wanted to listen to this guy. His name was Mike Kendall. And he thought that William was a fraud years before, but no one was really listening. And by the way, I was even bamboozled by William. I was trying to get him on my BBC travel series because I believed all these other guys. They vouched for him, and I thought, these are smart guys. I've met these guys. They're not idiots. They vouched for him, and I believed him. So I was negotiating with William all the way back to 2015. We started corresponding, and I wanted to have him on my show too, and I wanted to profile him as well too. So I lumped myself in that category of people who was fooled by William.
He was very elusive. I mean, he never really came out and described why he was a billionaire, or who his relatives were, or his mother's name, or where they lived, or I mean, he was a slippery kind of guy in a very aristocratic way. He didn't want to brag about his wealth or where he lived, but there were mentions of certain touchstones to wealth. His house, his manor. He would get a first class ticket on a flight when everybody else was flying coach, or pay $100 upgrade to a suite in a hotel, all indicating that money was really not his motive here, and he was not of great interest in him. But being who he was, he deserved all this stuff. So even you, I mean, it was hard to there was a family with his last name, and they did make a lot of money way back when. But it was hard to pin down, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, because he wasn't boastful. As I point out in the book, he didn't even have a blog. Like most young people in their 20s who are super uber world travelers, they've got a blog, right? They've got a big social media presence. They're making YouTube videos. They're promoting themselves. He wasn't doing that. He was almost doing the opposite of that.
Was he even on those lists of the travelers clubs for most countries?
Yes, he did participate in the list, and that's how one of the guys, for example, David Langan, first came on his radar, because David Langan was always the #1 traveler in Ireland, #1 ranked traveler. And all of a sudden, one day he saw that William Bakeland, even though he's British, he started living in Ireland, and William took over the #1 spot in Ireland. And suddenly he logged in one day and saw, wait a second, I'm #2 in Ireland. Who the hell is this? Who's #1? And he clicked into this person and said, wait a second, this guy's like 23 years old, and he just took over the #1 ranking. How could this be? One thing I don't remember being clear. I just finished your book today, actually, and enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
Do we believe that William Bakeland went to all the countries he said he went to in his very young life?
From the best that I can tell, he went to many of the countries that he claims to have been to, but not all of them. And so he is extremely well traveled. That part is real. And his passion for travel, as I said before, when I said before that his story came unraveled, and almost everything people thought they knew about him was false. Not everything, because I think that the one thing about him that was genuine was his love of travel and geography in obscure places.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so some of these guys start comparing notes, and some people went to the authorities, didn't they?
Yes, and some of them are still going to authorities wherever they can, without much degree of success so far. But yes.
And you started communicating with him. You never met with him, did you?
With William? Yeah. Not in person, but he and I have been in close contact now for 6 years. In fact, he's still sending me texts. Most recently of last week, I got some updates from him.
But have you done a Zoom call with him or anything where you saw him in person?
Absolutely not, because I would not submit to his requirements. So we had very lengthy negotiations. I traveled in William's footsteps in England. I went to see the house where he grew up in. I traveled around his neighborhood. I talked to people. I was in negotiations to meet with him in person. But I am not the sort of person who will agree to any sort of, I do not negotiate with people over interviews. Either you will speak to me without any conditions whatsoever, or forget it. That was my terms. And under those things, he did not want to do it that way. So what he was willing to do, though, which he did not do for any other writer or journalist or the HBO series that was produced about him, was to correspond extensively with me over a period of years via many different methods. I received lots of emails from him, but also many typewritten letters, which I photographed and put some of them in like who receives typewritten letters, right? And also texts and all sorts of different things. So we communicated like that, but he did not want to meet in person unless, for example, he had a number of different terms that he wanted me to agree to. One of them would be that I would allow him to read the book prior to its publication. And I said no. However, I changed my mind about that one later on, and actually did end up sending William a copy of the book, but I wasn't going to agree to it like as though he could review it and then make changes, or no. So I sent it to him when it was done and said, "This is the book. Enjoy it, William. Happy reading." And I was sort of just bracing myself for letters from his lawyers, because throughout the process, he'd been threatening me with all sorts of lawsuits. And I was fully expecting to receive something from his lawyer, and was surprised and delighted one day when I got a message from him saying that he enjoyed the book, which was perhaps one of the most surprising things of the whole research.
I was surprised at that reaction too, but the constant theme in his communication with you, at least as the ones you presented in your book, he was very coquettish about things. You would say,
yeah,
you know, what accounts for this passion you have for traveling? He never really answered that question. I think you went to his home address, which was found by these guys who were investigating near Sutton Coldfield in England, and it was a very dismal neighborhood. Not the grand.
Yes.
You expected to find a grand country estate with horses and carriages and guards with bearskin caps on their heads or something. And it was a very dismal neighborhood. He didn't want to talk about any of that, did he? He didn't want to explain that.
No.
There was always, oh, well, we moved. Go ahead.
Rudy, let me back up. I'll answer your question, but let me back up for a second too, because I teased that I received a text from him last week. I'll tell you also that as a footnote to our correspondence is that he told me that he's going to be coming to Florida, where I live, in December, and that he would like to get together with me. So now that the book is out and he's already read it and apparently liked it, there's no preconditions or problem. And he actually said he would like to meet with me. So it looks like I will be getting a chance to meet with Bakelin hopefully later on this year. So isn't that interesting?
You want to make a bet on that?
Well, we'll see, but I don't know. He reached out to me, so I thought it was interesting. And
I'm sorry.
I think that a number of British tabloids wrote stories about William. The Daily Mail wrote brief stories. Rolling Stone online, the website, wrote stories and such, and a number of other media outlets wrote articles about him. And he felt that those were all, I'm not going to use his quotes because they're very foul language, but he despised all of those. And he felt like they were completely unfair to him, factually inaccurate, so on and so forth. So I think, without trying to toot my own horn, I think what he told me, at least, that he appreciated about my book is that I at least endeavored to be fair to him, and that I gave him a chance to speak. And I quoted from his letters extensively. Of course, I didn't publish all of his letters because some of them are, like one of them in particular, a notorious one, was 18 pages long and full of all kinds of anti-Semitic garbage and all kinds of other, just awful stuff. So I wasn't going to publish that whole thing. But I think he appreciated the fact that I endeavored as best as possible to give him a fair shot in the book. And now I'm sorry, I forgot what the question was because I backtracked now.
Well, I was just talking about how coquettish he was in the writing.
Right.
But let me just, he definitely went off the rails on that 18-page letter. Oh my gosh. But the other ones were sort of written in an aristocratic sort of tone of voice, generalities, because we're all, but I'll also, by the way, I'll make you a lunch bet that he's not going to show up in December. So we'll see. I owe you lunch.
He probably won't.
Vice versa.
He probably won't.
You accept that bet? Lunch?
No, I don't accept the bet because I think you're right. It's probably, I think chance of him showing up is 20%.
Yeah. Okay. I thought so. Yeah. I was just amazed at his, I don't know, flowery writing is the right phrase.
Yes.
But with very few specifics that you could get a hold of as a journalist.
Right.
I imagine it must have been very friendly. And plus, you never knew when he was going to answer, if he was going to answer. And he had an intermediary who was sort of his assistant who would tell you, it was full of intrigue. So what happened was, when I was in England, people will read more details about this, obviously, in the book, but they were teasing me in England that if I agreed not to harass his family members, which I wasn't planning to harass them anyways. I think at this point in time, when I was in England snooping around, he suspected that I was like one of the Daily Mail reporters or one of these people who was really going to do a slash and burn job on him and not give him any opportunity, whatever. And he was extremely fearful of me at that point. And he said that if I agreed not to harass his family, that I would be receiving the
this special mystery letter from him and such. And I wasn't planning on harassing his family anyway. So I said, okay, great. I would like your mystery letter and such. So it's very interesting. It was, believe me, all of the negotiations and the intrigue and the suspense and my correspondence with William was fascinating. And I sort of relished all of it, except for the horrible letter that he sent, the 18-page letter, which I had a hard time even finishing reading that thing. And then also one of the other letters where he wished that I and my whole family would get COVID and die. I didn't like those too much, but the rest of it I enjoyed. I'll be honest.
My guest is David Seminara. He's the author of a new book called Mad Travelers. The subtitle is A Tale of Wanderlust, Greed, and the Quest to Reach the Ends of the Earth. There are these travelers. There's a whole secret, there's the cover, there's a whole secret world of these guys mainly who are out there trying to collect more countries than anybody else. And there are ongoing debates about how many countries there are in the world, legitimate countries, and you didn't spend much time on this, Dave, but I wanted to ask you, I mean, some of these people it's enough for them to land in the airport, touch the ground, and get on the next flight out to say, hey, I just got back from I just got in today from Montenegro to France. I was in Montenegro. I flew in there. Here's my airline ticket. I was there. I flew out 5 hours later. Some of them seem to be in that school. Am I drawing that conclusion correctly?
I would say they're in the minority, and I'm really glad you asked me that question, because this is one thing about the research of this book and getting to know these guys over a period of 6 or 7 years that I loved, is that I started this project with a very negative impression of country collecting as a whole, because I believed more in the school of thought of more immersive travel. I was more the sort of person who, instead of going to 7 countries and in 5 days, I would be the guy who would spend 1 month and just go to one country, try to get to know that one country well. That's my personality. And I think a lot of people have sort of a condescending attitude towards the country collectors. And my opinion about them shifted 180 degrees. And I'll tell you why for a few reasons. First of all, many of these guys are much more impressive and knowledgeable and intelligent than I would have surmised. And they do learn things about the places that they visit. They may not spend a tremendous amount of time in each place. However, cumulatively, the amount of time they've spent traveling, I find it hard to let's compare a guy like some of these people that I've spoken to and had interviews with. Much they might be, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of them might be the type of traveler who would go to let's say Italy every year and or Greece every year, something like that, and they might spend 2 weeks there or a month or something like that, and they would say, oh, but these guys are only spending X amount of time in whichever place, whatever. And I would say, yeah, but you add up all of the amount of traveling they've done in all of these places, and it's decades. It's, the guy who's 65 years old might have spent 35 years of it traveling. And I found that, the guy who just goes someplace and touches down the airport and leaves and doesn't learn anything, for every one guy like that, at least amongst the top elite guys, I can't speak to the guys who are ranked number 500 or 1,000 because I didn't interview them. But of the really top guys, for every one guy who is a dilettante who doesn't learn anything, there's 20 who are actually really smart and who could tell you a hell of a lot about the places that they visited. So I came away, I changed my mind about all this. And what I think I mentioned this in the book too, is that what I concluded is that we all have different ways of indulging our wanderlust, right? Some people like me don't like to hit lots of different countries in a small period of place, but that's okay. Other people have a different personality and they would rather travel systematically and hit every single country in Europe, every single country in Africa, whatever, because that's the way they think. I think there's no wrong way to indulge your wanderlust. There's no wrong way to travel. Some people take I call it like the tapas approach, right? A tapas is like you get a little taste of each thing, right? These guys are like tapas travelers, right? They don't spend 5 years in Italy, but they have been to 100 other countries, maybe a lot of other people haven't been to, right? So they're getting a smaller taste of lots of different places, whereas other travelers will gorge on a small number of countries, right? Pick the 5 or 10 most popular countries in the world, and people will just gorge on them and go to them over and over and over and over again. I mean, I remember the first time I met Don Parrish, who was one of the first top travelers that I ever met. I profiled him for BBC in 2000, 14, I think it was. That's out there if you Google it. But Don and I, we were both big travelers, but I felt like we weren't even communicating well. It was almost like we were speaking different languages, because he was asking me, how do I choose my travel destinations? And I said, well, I don't know, just wherever I feel like going, whichever place picks my fancy. Well, how do you choose your destinations? And he chooses them systematically based upon, well, I've been to, all of these countries, but I had missed this one region of Sudan, so I got to get to that one. And to me, his mode of travel made no sense. But he said to me, well, you're just cherry picking countries, when I described how I choose places. And I thought, that's kind of an interesting way to describe my mode of travel. And I guess I had to admit he was right. I am sort of like a cherry picker in his cherry picking countries, just going to the nicest places in the world, the most luxurious, the most fascinating places. Why should I be morally superior to a guy who's slugging it out in the Mogadishus of the world and who's staying in one-star hotels and risking his life, So I changed my mind about all these guys, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them, because what they do, these are not vacations. Once you get to the place, starting to go to the places these guys are going to, these are not holidays. These are not comfortable. There's no Marriotts in these places. These guys are hardcore. I really Did I lose you already?
No, we're back. I'm sorry. There was a little blip. There was a little burp there. Yeah. You were saying you highly respect some of these guys.
Oh, I highly respect most of these guys, and a lot, because they're hardcore. You don't get to the Marian Islands of the world where you spend 6 days on a small boat getting seasick and throwing up with everybody and eating food out of tin cans for 6 days. You've got to be hardcore. You've got to really want it to get to the ends of the earth. And these guys have that motivation. And I can't emulate them because I'm not that hardcore, but I respect the heck out of them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Let's end by returning to our boy William. Toward the end of your book, you say actually, I'm not sure he was a con man as much as just somebody who was trying to figure out a way to put money in his pocket so he could go see go to the ends of the earth on somebody else's dime, and he had affected this upper class billionaire persona in order to gain the trust and confidence of other wealthy people who could give him a lot of money. Where is he today, or do you know where he is today? I mean, he seems to send you some of the postcards or letters. He says, well, I'm here, but I'm on my way to the sub-Sahara, and I'm married in Italy, which he didn't wind up doing. Where is he today? Is he in any legal jeopardy? He claims, and his claims, he has been paying some people back, and apparently a couple of those folks said yes, they've gotten some money back from him. Give us sort of a picture of the world traveling con man today that you know about.
Okay, so first let me clarify what I meant when I said that I wasn't sure after all of this whether he was a con artist or not. He undoubtedly conned all these people. He conned them, that's for sure. But what I meant by that was, I'm still unsure whether he is a con artist in the classic sense. And when I think of the classic con artist, it's someone who moves from one con to the next, meaning that, 1 month it might be travel, the next month they might be, selling fake Rolexes on Canal Street in Manhattan or whatever.
Right.
And I guess what I meant by that was that I still believe in a way that, I'd like people to read the book and you can hear my thoughts more on it, but I will just tease it by saying that I think that his love of travel was genuine. He fell into this subculture. He became interested in this subculture of extreme travel and competitive travel. He got to know some of these guys. He wanted to be like them, but he was not wealthy. He was actually poor. He's from a working class family, right? And he dreamed of travel from a young boy. From the time that he was a young boy, he was studying train timetables and things like that from when time he was a little kid. So I think he aspired to a lifestyle he could not achieve on his own means. And he found a way to do that. And he certainly conned people. But what I meant by the con artist thing was that I wasn't sure. What I really feel is that he was someone who was trying to finance his own wanderlust. I think that was the bottom line. And regarding William and where he is now and things of that nature, William is a man of international mystery and intrigue. You'll read all about this fascinating character in the book. But, I can tell you that he does give me updates about now I'm here, now I'm there. Are these sightings, are these reportings that he's giving me? Is he sending me smoke signals, or is he telling me the truth? God only knows. I can tell you just for what it's worth. He told me that most recently, if you'd like to know, he said he was in northern Utah, up near the border of Idaho. What was he doing there? Was he really there? Oh, God only knows. Rudy, I have no idea. Is he in legal jeopardy? The final point of your question. A number of different people have filed claims against him in different countries. As far as I can ascertain, the only victim of Williams who still harbors any dream or hope of recovering any money out of William is a gentleman named Dominique Laurent. I wish we'd had time to get to him too, because he's another wonderful mad traveler that you'll read about in my book. He's a fascinating guy, and another guy whom I respect tremendously because he's an excellent traveler. He is still pursuing William. I would say he is the most determined or vengeful, I would say, I guess, of yes.
August, yeah.
He is still pursuing William in the French courts, and supposedly Irish Gardaí investigators, detectives are still investigating, but how seriously they're investigating, I have no idea. Will the French courts ever get to this case? Will he ever receive justice? My prediction would be no.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've given you a very a broad brush with some fabulous anecdotes. Look at Dave's new book. Let me tell you again, it's run across the screen a couple times, but it's called Mad Travelers. You can find it on Amazon or anywhere you buy books. The subtitle is A Tale of Wanderlust, Greed, and the Quest to Reach the Ends of the Earth. Dave Seminara spells his name S as in Sam, Eminara. Dave Seminara, Mad Travelers. It's an amazing account of this subculture of I don't know what the right adjective is. Mad travelers, I guess.
Compulsive travelers. And the book is about, we get into travel addiction a lot in the book too, about whether it's a legitimate addiction. I saw an addiction counselor at one point to ask him if he thought travel could be a legitimate addiction. Full of all kinds of fun stuff in the book. Thanks for having me on the show. I'd like to mention too that you can find out more about the book on my website, as you said, daveseminara.com. I'm all over the internet. I'm on Instagram. I'm Mad Traveler on Instagram. I'm also Mad Traveler on YouTube. I put a lot of travel videos out too, so check me out.
Oh, Mad Traveler on YouTube. Good. I will look at that. Thank you, Dave, so much. Wait a minute. Let me get my plugs in here. Okay. All right. Dave, thank you for joining. I'll say goodbye to him now. And if you have not subscribed to my every other week newsletter, my travel newsletter, it's not that long. It's not selling anything. It's just new country rules for COVID tests, that sort of thing, how to maximize your frequent flyer miles, what's going on in the travel world, a bunch of short stuff, sometimes my opinions on things. So feel free to go to maxatours.com/newsletter and sign up. maxatours.com/newsletter, and just put in your first, last name and the email, and I'll put you on the list. Doesn't cost anything. And sort of my ramblings are in there along with a lot of stuff you might find useful for travel. And if you'd like to take a look at our 2022 tours there as well, that's maxatours.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you enjoyed this interview and any of my other interviews here, just click that little subscribe button there in the lower side of this of the frame there, and you'll be alerted to our next week's interview and every other week's, our next 2 weeks from now interview and every other 2 weeks thereafter. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Rudy Maxa. Travel safely. Don't give your money to a guy named William right now, but do pick up Dave's book called Mad Travelers. Thanks so much for joining. Bye-bye.